Story 1, health issues. I know I've been genetically lucky, but after 20, random things just start happening for no reason. It's like Daryl developing a soy allergy at 35. Who develops a soy allergy at 35? Story 2. Understanding why your parents wanted you to go play with the awkward kid, or why they were so keen to help you make friends. It's beyond annoying as a kid when your parents try to guide who you make friends with, but most parents instinctively know that bad social habits start early, are hard to break, and can be a real burden when you are older. Story 3. Friendships fading away. I remember my dad telling me all kinds of interesting stories about things he and his friends did in the past. I even asked him, "Why aren't you still friends with these people?" He basically said, "It's complicated. You'll understand when you're older." Even back then, I remember thinking, that's crazy, my friends and I will always be friends. Sitting here now in my early 30s, it really hits home. Story 4. It is possible to do everything right and still fail. Don't let it consume you. Pick up the pieces and move on. I had to learn this after a project that I was on for 3 years was sabotaged and terminated. I did some amazing work and poured my life into that project. In the end, I had nothing to show for it. Put me in a real slump for a few years. I'm still trying to pull myself out of it without becoming a cynical and jaded person. Story 5, hand-me-downs. I absolutely hated them, even though my grandma was a genius with them. Dyeing artistic patches, new buttons, they just didn't last compared to the new clothes my older sister had. Then I had 3 boys in 6 years. I'm seriously grateful that my grandma tried so hard to make my hand-me-downs look good. I get it now. Story 6, time. Wasting time and how time flies. It's mid-December and I'm saying to myself, what the heck? It's been 9 months of COVID and I can't believe this year is almost over. As you age, it seems to go faster and faster. When I was younger, I felt like time just dragged on some days. Story 7. Something a little more lighthearted, but about half the jokes on cartoons like SpongeBob take on a whole new light once you have more experience under your belt. Story 8. What parents sacrifice just so you can do something fun. Last night, my husband and I sat in a line of cars for an hour and a half so our kids could see this cheesy drive-through light display in my town with Santa and other characters. Not worth it for us, but the kids loved it, and it was worth it to see them enjoy a fun Christmas activity during a pandemic. It made me think of how much my parents had to endure taking my brother and me to theme parks and other activities as kids just to see us happy. I appreciate it infinitely more now. Story 9. Literally getting older. Never thought much about when adults would say, "You are still young, just enjoy it." I always wanted to be older because I was tired of high school, wanted to be out of college, and so on. Now I want aging to slow down a bit. Story 10. Teenagers are just kids. It's something I was not capable of understanding until I was no longer a teenager. When I was a teenager, I felt so grown up. Story 11. In my teens and 20s, I just couldn't understand how my parents were so oblivious to celebrities. They were all over television. Their names and faces blasted on everything. It seemed everybody had some strong emotionally charged opinion about every major actor, musician, director, or tabloid magnate. What are they, living under a rock? Didn't take long to find out why. Growing up, I didn't have a pre-existing list of these are famous people. I learned them as they came onto the scene. Eventually, though, they all dropped off the list one by one. The list kept updating. It's a lot harder knowing who is a household name when you also have to know who is last week's news. I was only 30 when I realized I have no idea who famous people are anymore. I just couldn't keep up at all. I've become like my parents. Don't know. And honestly, don't care. Celebrity worship, even as cursory as simply knowing their names, is a vapid, fruitless endeavor. Today's idols are tomorrow's trash. Story 12. Love. I thought I loved my wife when I was 20. Now I am 50 and we have been together over 30 years. I realize now that when I was 20, I didn't understand what love is. I hope 70-year-old me looks back on 50-year-old me and says the same thing. Story 13. There's really no going back. You really just get one shot with each hour you get. You just have to make your peace with the choice or path you took and keep moving. Story 14. King Triton, Ariel's dad, was right. She was just a child, and she was not in love with the random prince she saw for all of 30 seconds. Edit. Thanks for the gold. Friends, I will take it back to my hoard of trinkets from the human world. Story 15. That everything has shades of gray and is a sliding scale. It is so easy to understand the world as absolutes when young. Suddenly realizing in my late teens or early 20s that basically nothing is an absolute was a total revelation that really steers my understanding of everything and undoubtedly makes me a better person. Story 16. Not all people have your best interests at heart. People will take advantage of your kindness and compassion. And finally, that everyone else's problems are not your own. You can try to help people, but they have to want to help themselves. Story 17. Money. There was a reason that you didn't get those shoes, the PlayStation 5, a new shiny car, and so on. Maintaining a home and keeping the family fed is very expensive. Story 18. On a positive note, there is a freedom to being a grown-up that I didn't grasp as a kid. Just last week, a fourth grader asked the question, "What's it like to be grown up?" My co-teacher and I started to laugh, and I said, "Well, it's got its ups and downs." The child asked, "Is it boring to pay bills?" I replied, "Well, that's definitely a down, and it's not really boring." I searched in my head for something positive and came up with, "But you know what? I can go to Arby's pretty much any time I want. So there's that." And thus erupted a screen full of kids in wonder that yes, as a grown-up, you may be able to get Arby's pretty much whenever you want. I even said something like, "You'll understand when you're a grown-up and have a car, but it's pretty cool." And you know what? It is pretty cool. Story 19. A parent's love for their child. A year after my granddaughter was born, my daughter was telling me how wonderful her toddler is, how smart she is, and just all around lovable she is. She then said, "I don't think I could ever love anyone as much as I love my daughter." Then she paused for a moment as realization washed over her face. "Dad, is this how much you love me?" Bingo, kiddo. Now you know. Story 20. I lost my mom in August 2020. I can sincerely say that I feel like I have learned more in the last 3 months than I have in my entire life. I have gone from someone who thought being right and doing the right thing was the most important thing to understanding that being kind, loving, compassionate, and empathetic is so much more important. Always choose love. You will never regret it. Ever. Story 21. When I was a kid, I watched my mom and dad refuse to let my grandparents pay for something or pay them back for something. I thought that was silly as a kid and said I wouldn't do that. But as an adult, I find myself always doing the same thing I said I never would. Story 22. All these comments about money and managing your finances make me kind of sad considering I was the opposite. I had to mature at a really young age because of my irresponsible father draining my mother's finances. She had nobody to vent to, and very soon I became her confidant at 8 years old. I don't blame her. She was struggling and needed someone. If anything, we're as close as we are now because of it. But now I'm left with constant anxiety whenever she's a little low for the month and willingly let her pile her issues onto me, even if I regret it after. I wish more than anything I could have had just a few more years to be a normal child. Oh well. Story 23. The power of your peers. One of the gifts of middle age is you finally stop caring so much about what everyone else thinks of what you're doing, largely because you realize other people no longer care, if they ever did in the first place. Once that veil lifts, everything feels different. But until then, you really have no idea how much what you decide or want has had to do with pleasing the people around you, trying to fit in with them, or at least avoiding their ire. Story 24. How foolish you are right now. People tend to think they are pretty knowledgeable and wise at any given moment in their life, but then you age a decade and look back and think, wow, I was such an idiot. How did I not realize how inconsiderate I was being? And other such things. Then you'll think, I'm glad I'm better now. Now I'm pretty knowledgeable and wise. Then another decade passes. Story 25. When I was a kid, my dad and I had a tradition every week of going to the video store and renting a movie or two to watch together. It was one of my favorite things to do, but I remember I used to get really upset at him because every single time we'd actually start to watch the movie, he would fall asleep. It wasn't until I was older that I realized the reason he would fall asleep was because he was exhausted from working two very physically demanding jobs to try and give me the best life he possibly could. Even though he was tired, he still made an effort to start a little tradition with me and spend time with me. Those memories of me having to nudge my dad awake are so great in my eyes because they made me realize what a caring and hardworking man he was and still is. Just wanted to add that my dad and I have kept our tradition going in a way by watching a movie together every month or so. We used to go to the theaters, but obviously COVID has complicated that, so we settle for just watching something together on the couch. We did manage to get a theater to ourselves for his birthday this year. He still falls asleep sometimes, but I don't mind at all, he deserves it. Story 26. The value of discipline. You might have all the intelligence or potential in the world, but without discipline, everything you hold dear, all the intelligence that you used to validate yourself as an excuse, is snatched away in the blink of an eye. It might have been cool to embody the character of that stereotypical lazy genius who gets things done when needed, when you were younger, perhaps as an adolescent, as you would have liked to think that you would pull it off the same. Years pass by, the laziness, the lack of effective principles starts to take a toll unless reversed, incompetency sets in, lethargy becomes a habit, time management becomes a joke, priorities are misplaced, personal relationships are ruined, and perhaps your lack of discipline might also spiral you into substance abuse or other addictions, starting a vicious cycle of pain and suffering. Remember this: the way you do something is the way you do everything. Try to understand what this means. If this doesn't scare you, I don't know what else will. Story 27. What it truly feels like when your body starts to give out on you. So very subtle and sneaky. Feels like your body is deceiving you. Like the rules of nature and the universe, according to all of your experience up to this point, have suddenly been thrown out the window. For the first time in a long time, you find yourself asking, how long is it going to take to get better? And you have no idea anymore. Story 28. This is morbid, but when people decide to die, I never understood why someone would kill themselves. Now I understand that the well of pain and loneliness is just too much for some. Story 29. There is nothing more patronizing or even insulting than someone older saying what you think or are doing is some sort of phase you are going through, that you'll change your mind later. No one should ever do that. However, when you approach middle age, you realize just how many times in your life you thought you had it all figured out, even if it meant you had decided nothing makes sense and you have no idea who you really are, and then totally changed your mind or at least amended your philosophies. Story 30. I used to think that my parents were incredibly boring, and I guess they were and are, but now that I'm knocking on the door of 40, I'm tired like all of the time. I prefer life to be boring and stable because I don't want to deal with unpleasant surprises. Even pleasant surprises can be draining. Just leave me alone to live in peace and quiet, and I will be as close to happy as is possible. Story 31. Responsibility, getting older increases it. From expectations and interdependence. You'll never be more free of responsibility than when you're a kid, and while you're a kid, you can't wait to outgrow it. Story 32. All of the times young people cringe at older people embarrassing themselves. Once you realize the futility of keeping up with societal pressures, cringing at others becomes a hallmark of immaturity. Story 33. Just because you love someone doesn't mean you should be together. I always grew up thinking that it was really dumb for people to break up if they loved each other. But since my last relationship, I've realized that sometimes love is just not enough. Sometimes you have to love yourself just a bit more. Story 34. Love. When you are young, you have this delusional view of what love should be, especially because the sample size of it had been given unconditionally up until your first heartbreak. Turns out you have got to earn it differently for every prospect you meet. Your version of the love you can give is not for everyone. Story 35. A number of negative behaviors I associated with age made more sense to me as I realized how much more tired I was at 40 than at 20, even from doing exactly the same things. Inflexibility about plans, irritation with noise or distractions, shortness in dealing with frustrations, ossifying political and personal beliefs. They all just feel more tempting when you're exhausted and don't want to sink time and energy into arguments, explanations, or replanning things. It's not an excuse. I work hard to avoid those things now that I can see that biological forces will keep pushing me toward them. But man, It's a real battle sometimes when you just want a peaceful night without some other damn thing that needs you to work on it. Story 36. That adults hitting kids isn't normal. I grew up in an extremely abusive home and was actively taught that everyone treated their kids like this. I believed it and never told anyone about what happened at home until I was 19. When I had kids of my own, I thought I would have to fight myself not to hurt them because I didn't want to be like my parents. But I didn't. I could never say or do the things to my kids that my parents did to me. I never will. My parents are no longer a part of my life and will never be a part of my children's lives again. My children will never see abuse as normal. Edit. Thanks for the awards. I appreciate it.